The Chase Center's media room buzzed with the familiar energy of post-game interviews. Cameras clicked rapidly as reporters shuffled their notes, preparing for what they expected to be another routine press conference. The Golden State Warriors had just secured a crucial playoff victory, and Stephen Curry sat at the podium, his jersey still damp with sweat, answering the usual questions about three-pointers and team strategy. "Stephen, your daughter Riley has been quite vocal about wanting to follow in your footsteps. Any thoughts on that?" asked Sarah Martinez from ESPN, her voice cutting through the murmur of the room. Stephen's face lit up with that trademark smile that had charmed fans for over a decade. "You know, Riley's got her own dreams, and we support whatever path she chooses. She's been working hard on her game, but more importantly, she's developing into an incredible young woman." "Speaking of Riley," interjected James Chen from Sports Illustrated, "we understand she's here tonight. Would she be willing to join you for a few questions?" The request wasn't unusual. Riley had been a media darling since her adorable interruptions during Stephen's press conferences when she was a toddler. Now 12, she had grown into a poised young girl who handled media attention with grace that seemed to run in the family. Stephen glanced toward the back of the room where Riley sat with her mother, Aisha. The girl nodded enthusiastically, her long curls bouncing as she made her way to the front. The room's atmosphere shifted, becoming warmer and more relaxed, as Riley took the seat beside her father. "Hi, Riley," called out several reporters in unison, their voices filled with genuine affection for the girl they'd watched grow up in the public eye. "Hi, everyone," Riley responded, her voice clear and confident. She wore a simple Warriors hoodie and jeans, looking every bit the normal preteen despite the extraordinary circumstances of her life. The questions started. Light and playful, Riley talked about school, her basketball training, and her favorite players on her dad's team. She laughed easily, making jokes that had the entire room chuckling. Her comfort level was remarkable for someone so young, a testament to years of navigating life in the spotlight. "So Riley," said Marcus Thompson from The Athletic, leaning forward with interest, "there's been a lot of talk about the pressure that comes with being Stephen Curry's daughter. How do you handle that? When you're on the court yourself?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Riley's smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly that most people in the room missed it. But Stephen noticed. He had learned to read his daughter's expressions like a playbook, and something in her eyes told him this question had struck deeper than intended. Riley began, then paused. Her hands, which had been gesturing animatedly throughout the interview, now fidgeted with the strings of her hoodie. "Try not to think about it too much. But surely it must be difficult," pressed another reporter. "When you step onto any basketball court, people are comparing you to one of the greatest shooters of all time. That's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone a 12-year-old. The room had grown quieter now, sensing that the interview had taken a more serious turn. Riley looked down at her hands, and when she looked back up, her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. She started again, her voice smaller now. "Sometimes it's really hard." Stephen's hand instinctively moved toward his daughter, but he stopped himself, recognizing that she needed to find her own words, her own strength in this moment. The media training had taught him to let interviews flow naturally, but every fatherly instinct screamed at him to protect her from this vulnerability. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every emotion that flickered across Riley's face. In homes across America, families watched as this poised young girl began to reveal the weight she'd been carrying. Riley took a shaky breath, her composure beginning to crack under the intensity of the moment. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, the cameras more intrusive, and the silence more suffocating. What had started as a fun opportunity to share her experiences had transformed into something much more raw and honest. "Every time I walk onto a court," Riley continued, her voice wavering, "everyone expects me to be as good as my dad. Coaches look at me differently. Other players either want to be my friend because of who my father is, or they try extra hard to beat me to prove something." Stephen felt his heart constrict. He had always tried to shield his children from the negative aspects of his fame, but he was beginning to realize that his protective efforts could only go so far. Riley was growing up in a fishbowl, and the pressure was real, even if he had hoped she wouldn't feel it. At school, Riley went on, now unable to stop the words from flowing, kids always ask me why I'm not on varsity yet, or why I missed a shot in our last game. They record me during lunch breaks when I'm just shooting around for fun, and then post it online with comments about whether I'm living up to the Curry name. A reporter shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The room that had been filled with warmth and laughter just minutes before now felt heavy with the weight of an unexpected confession. Many of the journalists were parents themselves, and Riley's words struck a chord that went beyond sports journalism. "I love basketball," Riley said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I really do. But sometimes I wonder if I love it because I actually love it, or because everyone expects me to love it, and that scares me." Stephen's professional composure finally cracked. He reached over and gently placed his hand on Riley's shoulder, offering her the comfort of his presence without interrupting. Her moment of truth. "I practice for hours every day," Riley continued, her voice growing stronger even as the tears continued. "Not because anyone makes me, but because I feel like I have to prove that I deserve to be Stephen Curry's daughter. Like I have to earn a place in my own family." The admission hung in the air like a revelation. In the back of the room, Aisha had tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth. She and Stephen had worked so hard to create a normal environment for their children, but hearing Riley's words made her realize how impossible that task truly was. "When I mess up," Riley said, her voice barely above a whisper now, "I see the disappointment in people's faces. And I know they're not disappointed in me as Riley. They're disappointed because I'm not living up to what they think a Curry should be capable of." Marcus Thompson, the reporter whose question had opened this floodgate, looked stricken. He had intended to explore the topic of legacy and pressure in sports families, but he hadn't expected to witness a 12-year-old girl's raw honesty about carrying a burden that no child should have to bear. "I'm sorry," Riley said suddenly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't mean to. I don't usually—" "Don't apologize," Stephen said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "Never apologize for being honest about how you feel." The cameras continued to roll, but something had shifted in the room. This was no longer a sports interview. It had become a moment of human connection, a glimpse into the real cost of fame and the weight that children of celebrities carry without anyone fully understanding. Riley looked around the room at the faces of reporters and camera operators, many of whom had covered her family for years. Some were parents themselves, others were young journalists just starting their careers, but all of them were witnessing something profound and unexpected. "I just want people to see me as Riley," she said, her voice growing clearer. "Not as Stephen Curry's daughter who happens to play basketball, just as me. And I want to know that when I do well at something, it's because I worked hard for it, not because people expected me to be good at it." The silence that followed was thick with understanding. Everyone in that room realized they were witnessing something special, not because of who Riley's father was, but because of who she was revealing herself to be. Stephen Curry had faced down the pressure of NBA Finals games, hit impossible shots with millions watching, and handled media scrutiny for over a decade. But sitting beside his daughter as she bared her soul to a room full of strangers, he felt more vulnerable than he ever had on any basketball court. He looked at Riley, seeing not the poised young girl who had entered the room 20 minutes earlier, but his little daughter who still sometimes crawled into bed with him and Aisha during thunderstorms. The weight of what she had just shared settled over him like a heavy blanket. "Can I say something?" Stephen asked, his voice unusually quiet. The room nodded collectively, sensing that whatever came next would be important. Stephen turned slightly in his chair to face Riley more directly, though his words were meant for everyone present. "Riley, I need you to know something, and I need everyone in this room to hear it too." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Years of fatherhood and fame, crystallizing into this single moment of truth. "When I first held you in the hospital 12 years ago," Stephen began, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "I made a promise, not to raise you to be a basketball player, not to raise you to carry on any legacy, but to raise you to be exactly who you were meant to be." Riley looked up at her father, tears still fresh on her cheeks, listening intently. "I've failed you," Stephen continued, the admission hanging heavy in the air. "Not because of anything I've done intentionally, but because I've allowed the world to put expectations on you that should never have been there in the first place." The room was silent except for the quiet hum of cameras and the barely audible sound of people holding their breath. "You said you want people to see you as just Riley," Stephen said, his voice growing stronger. "But here's what I see when I look at you. I see a girl who gets up every morning and chooses kindness. I see someone who helps her teammates even when they're struggling. I see a daughter who makes me laugh every single day and who cares deeply about her friends and family." Stephen's own eyes were beginning to fill with tears, but he pressed on. "I see a young woman who just had the courage to speak her truth in front of cameras and strangers, which is something most adults couldn't do. That has nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with the incredible person you are." Riley wiped her eyes again, but this time she was smiling through her tears. "I need to make something very clear," Stephen said, now addressing the room as much as his daughter. "Riley doesn't owe anyone anything. She doesn't owe it to basketball fans to play the game. She doesn't owe it to our family name to excel at anything in particular. The only thing she owes is to herself, to be true to who she is, and to chase whatever makes her happy." He reached over and took Riley's hand, a gesture so natural and paternal that it reminded everyone watching that, beneath all the fame and accolades, this was simply a father and daughter. "If tomorrow you told me you wanted to quit basketball and become a marine biologist, or an artist, or anything else in this world, my response would be the same. How can I help you achieve that dream?" Stephen looked directly into one of the cameras, his message now clearly intended for the broader world that would see this interview. "To everyone who watches my daughter play, or who comments on her social media, or who has opinions about her future, she is not your entertainment. She is not a project for you to evaluate. She is a 12-year-old girl who deserves the same space to grow, make mistakes, and find herself that every child deserves." The emotion in his voice was unmistakable now, years of protective instincts and paternal love pouring out in words that felt both spontaneous and long overdue. "The pressure you've described, Riley, that's not yours to carry. That's mine. I brought that into your life through my career, and I should have done better to shield you from it. But from this moment forward, we're going to handle things differently." Riley squeezed her father's hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about their bond and her trust in him. "The most important thing you said tonight," Stephen continued, "is that you want to be seen as just Riley. Well, I want everyone to know that just Riley is more than enough. Just Riley is extraordinary, not because of what she can do with a basketball, but because of who she is as a human being." As Stephen's words settled over the room, something remarkable happened. The reporters, who had come expecting to write about playoff victories and three-point percentages, found themselves witnessing something far more meaningful. Several were wiping their own eyes, moved by the raw honesty of the moment they had just experienced. Marcus Thompson, whose question had inadvertently opened this conversation, raised his hand, tentatively. "Stephen, Riley, I want to apologize. My question was meant to explore an interesting angle about sports families, but I realize now that I contributed to exactly the kind of pressure Riley was describing." Stephen nodded appreciatively, then looked to Riley. "What do you think, Ry? Do you want to respond to that?" Riley took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried a maturity that surprised everyone in the room. "Mr. Thompson, I don't think you meant any harm, and honestly, I'm kind of glad you asked, because I've been wanting to say these things for a long time. I just never knew how." She looked around the room, making eye contact with several of the reporters who had covered her family over the years. "I hope this doesn't stop people from asking me about basketball," Riley continued. "I do love the game, and I do want to keep playing. But I hope that when you write about me, you'll remember that I'm still figuring out who I am, just like any other kid my age." Sarah Martinez from ESPN leaned forward. "Riley, what would you want people to know about you that has nothing to do with basketball?" For the first time in the entire interview, Riley's smile was completely unreserved. I love to read. I'm really into marine biology. My dad was right about that one, she said with a small laugh, glancing at Stephen. I want to learn to surf this summer, and I'm terrible at video games, but I keep trying anyway because my little brother always beats me. And I can't let that slide. The room filled with gentle laughter, the tension finally beginning to ease. I have really good friends at school who like me for me, not because of my last name, Riley continued. I volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends, and I make really good pancakes. Those are the things that make me happy. Stephen beamed with pride, seeing his daughter reclaim her own narrative in real time. I want to keep playing basketball because it's fun, and because I'm getting better at it, Riley said. But I also want people to understand that whether I make it to college ball or the WNBA, or whether I decide to do something completely different, that's okay too. She looked directly at her father. Dad, thank you for saying all that. I didn't know I needed to hear it until you said it. Stephen squeezed her hand again. Riley, I need you to know that having this conversation doesn't mean you have to handle everything on your own from now on. If the pressure gets too much, if people are saying things that hurt, I want you to tell me. We're a team, and teams support each other. I will, Riley promised, and everyone in the room could see that she meant it. As the interview began to wind down, James Chen from Sports Illustrated asked one final question. Stephen, this conversation tonight, it's going to be seen by millions of people. What's your message to other parents whose children are growing up in the public eye? Stephen considered the question carefully. I think every parent, whether they're famous or not, needs to remember that our job isn't to live our dreams through our children. Our job is to help them discover their own dreams and then support them in pursuing those dreams, whatever they might be. He paused, looking at Riley with unmistakable love and respect. Tonight, my daughter taught me that she's been carrying a burden I didn't fully understand, but she also showed me that she has the strength and wisdom to speak up when something isn't right. That makes me incredibly proud, not as a basketball player, but as her father. As the cameras finally stopped rolling and the reporters began packing up their equipment, Riley stood up and hugged her father tightly. The embrace lasted longer than usual, both of them processing what had just happened. Dad? Riley said softly, so only he could hear. Yes, sweetheart? I'm really glad we had this talk. I feel lighter somehow. Stephen kissed the top of her head. Me too. Me too. As they walked out of the media room together, Stephen's arm around his daughter's shoulders, the dozens of people who had witnessed this moment knew they had seen something special. Not a basketball story, but a story about love, growth, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable in front of the world. The video of Riley and Stephen's interview would indeed be seen by millions, but the comments section would be different from the usual sports debate. Instead, it would be filled with parents thanking them for their honesty, young people expressing gratitude for Riley's courage, and countless messages of support for a family that had chosen authenticity over image management. In the weeks that followed, Riley would continue playing basketball, but with a new sense of freedom. The pressure hadn't disappeared entirely. That would take time. But something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer carrying the weight alone, and the world had been reminded that behind every famous name is a real person with real feelings, deserving of the same compassion and understanding we all hope for ourselves.